First of all, welcome to the meetup. It's been a while for me as well. Thanks to Kiran for inviting to talk on this meetup. Today, I'm going to talk about probably one of the most interesting and exciting things which I've been doing in the past 1 year at Dgraph, and that is typhoon-ui. Typhoon-ui is the name of the React component library which we have developed, and typhoon-ui powers Dgraph Cloud, the cloud solution of Dgraph. So the entire Dgraph console is built on typhoon-ui, and typhoon-ui is part of the larger Dgraph design system. And today, I think I'm going to talk more of the journey than the specifics of the library, or trying to tell you how the system works, rather how we actually came up with the system. So it's not really about designing a design system or designing Dgraph design system. It's more about discovering the Dgraph design system, because day one, nobody starts with a design system. You don't say, hey, you know what, let's build a design system today, and then you do certain things. Rather, the journey has always been you end up building the product, and then you try to discover what the right design system is for you and the team, or for the product. So that's going to be my focus on, and trying to surface my findings and the team's findings around how we came up with typhoon-ui, and where did we start with, and why did we made certain choices. So that's what the talk is going to revolve around in the next 20-30 minutes. So the first thing is, obviously we need to answer the question why. Why do we even really need a design system, or why do we need to invest efforts or development efforts into a design system? The first thing is, everyone wants to build a single system, right? Maybe within teams we have different pillars within the company, and you may be belonging to a certain team, but at the end of the day, when you're building a product, it's just one single system the user sees. The user doesn't understand different modules or different sections of your product. Rather, the user perceives one single system, and there should be a shared purpose among all the modules or all the divisions you have within the product. So it's very important that you provide the right set of tools, right set of principles and patterns to the team, so that they drive towards that single purpose. The second is, obviously we want consistency between the design, the code, and the language, right? There might be some tooling involved. You want to make sure that there's no delta between design and implementation, and language is also pretty important. Like, how do you define a certain component or certain UI tangible element in a day-to-day working style? So somebody call it primary button, somebody calls it some other button. So how do you come up with a more structured way, and so that you can communicate your ideas in a better way, and ensure there's no delta between design and implementation? And third is, everyone wants to build, we want to ship really good experience, right? And we don't want to ship broken experiences. We want it to be cohesive. It should be coherent across platforms, across different parts of the product. So again, it's all about unifying the experience with a single purpose. That's what the design system is all about. So that's why we really want to teams invest in a design system. So that's the first question which we try to answer here. The second is, what is a design system, right? So I know design system is talked about a lot nowadays on social media, and I see, there are different ideas about it, and there are different perspective to it. After a lot of reading and talking to a lot of people, I think what design system boils down is to four specific things, like very clear. I think you can take this as a benchmark for a design system. So there are four things. One is purpose, principles, and patterns, and shared language. So we'll be talking about all these four, and we'll be mostly focusing on the third, that is patterns, and we'll try to understand what exactly patterns are. So before getting into the specifics, what are the four things, and diving into patterns, I think when we started off with a design system, we started with some document. We said, hey, come up with a design system, and we try to give a justification, why a design system, and how do we go about a design system. So last year, around in September, I think we came up with this small document and say we try to understand, why we are doing this and how do we do this, right? So these are the first four things which we kind of thought about. So the first one is purpose. So there should be one single, um, objective across the team and across divisions, that there should be clarity around, like what we are trying to really solve for. And second would be the principles, right? How do you solve this purpose, right? You need to give the right questions to kind of say, hey, I need to solve this, but how do I do that? So, for example, um, we came up with certain design principles. For example, over here, so these are the example design principles which we came up with. So we said direction over choice. We said we don't want user to, get confused between a lot of configurations. Rather, nudge the user to make a particular decision rather than, showing five options and say, hey, choose the best one. Rather, suggest the user based on the information you have and say, or maybe based on the previous experience, suggest them, go for this. So like that, we have like, we build out four principles, and they were not necessarily were there from the day one. So it's not like we have written in stone that, hey, these are the four principles we are going to use to achieve our single purpose. Rather, these were evolved over a period of time. So we started with three, then we found out, a fourth one which kind of resonated between the team members and said, you know what, this should be part of the design principle which we have. So design principle also becomes like a parameter to justify any kind of design decision. So for example, hey, let's make this change. Do we have the principles supporting to make that change happen or enable that? So that is what the principles are. It's sort of a small toolkit which you give across the team, not just for designers but also for developers to make design choices. So design system helps everyone to make the right design choice. It's not always, you go to the designer and say, hey, what do you feel about that? Rather, the approach would be, hey, I think this is the best choice because these are the principles, and I think this is in the right direction. So that's what the principles really talk about. Then a purpose, as I said, there will be one single purpose, and the purpose should define who the user is, who we are really solving for, what is the value we are creating, and what is the uniqueness of the purpose, right? Every digital product will have its own unique proposition. So how is it different from everyone else, right? What makes you unique? I think that should also get communicated. And I think for example, in Dgraph Cloud, this was literally the purpose which we kind of defined and said, hey, this is what the purpose is. We said we want to like enable app developers, to like focus on really important development, and by simplifying backend development with zero management, and give them a super developer friendly interface. So that speaks a lot, right? From there you can derive what the user is, what kind of the user we are trying to address, what is the exact value we are creating, and then how unique it is, right? We are saying that, hey, it's going to be self-serve, it's going to be developer friendly. So that means that it needs to be accessible, it needs to be foolproof. So it defines a lot of guidelines for the principles, and then you can define the principles which work for you. So in essence, these are the two things um, which you can say become the foundation for the design system. And then the third, which is more of a tangible output of a design system, right? Purpose and principles looks like, it's all in theory, it's all a context elaborated. But what is the tangible outcome? I think that is where the patterns come in and the shared language. So going back, to where we kind of started this discussion. So, so we kind of understood what the purpose is and the principles. Now patterns. So patterns is slightly different for different type of people, different teams, I would rather say. So for designers and developers, I think patterns is where the match is. So for example, patterns is, for a designer may be Figma components, the component inventory, and design tokens. For developers, it might be the storybook component library and JSON styling system or something which you have corresponding to the token system in design. So there's slightly different. I think though the abstracts are same for both the teams, but the tools and the implementation might be slightly different. So here we are again going to be focusing on developer side, like talk about the token styling system, a JSON based styling, and how you can compose your storybook and keep a structure, and how that translates into design as well. So patterns is more of a tangible outcome of a design system. We'll be talking more about that. And fourth is one of the things which I feel it's very important for a successful design system is to have a shared language, right? So when it cannot be like, the design team understands a specific language and an engineering team has a different language. That doesn't work. And not just I'm trying to and I think I should also be clear that it's not just developers and designers take care of a design system. I think it's entire team and across the product people will be involved. So for example, even somebody from support or maybe from QA, if they come and say, hey, you know what, this specific style of button doesn't look correct over here. So that is where you can say, hey, you know what, we have a successful design system. When people talk about it, people use the terminology which you have created, and it's not necessarily a standard language. Hey, this is the glossary. This is the formal way of communicating these ideas. I think I debunk that theory. I think it is better to have your own nomenclature, own language around it, and not really follow some big standard which not everyone will be able to uh, absorb. So it's better to have it something very specific to your team, your product, and your company, right? So that really helps to kind of get the value out of the patterns and the purpose and the principles which you have set for the entire product. So again, we'll try to focus on the patterns in this talk and try to understand what it is. So there are two ways I would say, two types of patterns are there, right? One is functional and one is perceptual. So functional is more tangible units. For example, a button, a checkbox, which is very uh, non-domain specific, I would say. So it doesn't really have any kind of uniqueness. It's more of the day-to-day patterns which we see in any digital interface. The second is perceptual. I think that is where a lot of differentiation happens and a lot of personalization happens. For example, if you just take a random screenshot of any popular app like something like Slack or Netflix, irrespective of the source, you can kind of identify where this thing came up, right? For example, the maybe on Netflix you have a suggestions list. If you just screenshot it and share it to your friend, probably your friend will be able to say, hey, you know what, this is the screenshot from Netflix. Now how did that happen, right? So that is where the perceptual pattern is, something which is very related to that domain created by the company or the digital product, whatever it is. So, and also it could be patterns for domains. For example, adding something in your cart, like in an e-commerce site. If you add something, then on top you'll have a cart icon and the number increment. So that's a perceptual pattern. It's not really a functional pattern. It doesn't make any sense in isolation, but when in a composition, it makes more sense. So there are two vast categories, and I think there are some people who would say, there are more, and yes, there are more divisions where we say, there's an atoms, molecules, organism, templates, and pages. I think I'm kind of the guy who would be somebody who would say, okay, I think atoms and molecules and organisms make sense, and probably I might merge pages and templates in one place. So I think based on your requirement, I think you can cherry pick what works for you. By the way, this is atomic design. I think most of you might already know about it. So I think you can pick what works for you. I think that's the best approach I would suggest, and I think that is what has worked for us. So you can decide how many levels of abstractions you want, and what makes sense for the app and the development, and overall whether it makes sense to have those many buckets, right? So when you see in the developer bucket, right, what does really come into the developer side, right? In design system, what makes things different? So I think one is something called constraint-based system, where you have a certain set of values which we call tokens, and we say, you know what, we are going to operate on these tokens only, right? We don't go and say the size of the box is going to be 100 pixel, 200 pixel. Rather, we say we give a range and say, you need to choose something from here, right? And atomic component design. So you can describe your components and organize your components in an atomic design fashion. So you can say, hey, these are the components, which are of atom level. For example, primitive uh, primitive components become your atoms. Molecules can be composition of an atom. So that way you can organize the project structure and give do a separation of concern, define what is app specific and which is non-app specific. Third is style gun. This is something which we came up in Dgraph. So we came up with a custom style resolver. We saw there are many token based style resolvers. We came up with our own resolver, which I'll again like show you an example of how it is different. We'll talk about style gun a bit later. Storybook, I think Storybook is a living documentation. It's not just I would say just a simple documentation or a guideline. Rather, you can play with you can just fidget around with the components. Describe different states, and you can also generate a snapshot test out of it. Storybook does a lot of things. I think Storybook, I think, is common idea. I think probably everyone who talks about design system probably talk about Storybook as well. Chromatic is just a tool, again, built by Storybook. It allows you to run visual tests for components. So it's very important when you scale out and when people make a lot of changes every day, you want to make sure that you're not ending up changing the look and the feel of the entire app ecosystem. So you need to make sure that you have the right set of tests or some sort of tooling around doing visual tests. So Chromatic is something which we pick for. And last but not the least, naming is super, super important. As I said before, it should be memorable and it should be fun. People are not going to go and, learn all the names. Rather, come up with names which is going to be, easy to remember. So I'm going to show you like a couple of examples as well, how it would look like. So a project structure, I think most of you would know, there'll be some sort of organization, which we talked about, like, atoms, molecules, layouts. Again, you can define it by yourself. We define based on what worked for us and, which scaled for us. Um, Tokens. So again, tokens is nothing. I hope it's okay if you cannot read all the values, but what I wanted you to understand is just a JSON map. It's nothing else. And it says, hey, these are the colors I have. Within these colors, these are the variants I have. Let's say there's a font size. I have a range of values. That's all, right? Tokens is like one place where we define all these values, which we are going to use within the entire design system. Style gun. So style gun is nothing. It just takes a style object. That's what we call in the typhoon-ui ecosystem. It's nothing. It's just a CSS object, but with some extra properties. We have seen many of these open source tools doing that, and we try to bring out some of the useful patterns which we found. And we also added TypeScript, so it's super, super friendly. To just give you a gist, if you see on the left, there are a bunch of values, which is a standard CSS object. And on the right side, if you see, it's not really a standard, right? Padding X is not a valid CSS property. Uh, and and ping.dark is no, it doesn't correspond to any value, right? So StyleGun kind of does a magic. It just understands these custom properties which you define, and it translates that into the standard CSS object. And it also does with the values. If you see on the right side, I have not supplied pixels, I have just given numbers. And these numbers would correspond to a specific value in the style, the token object which you have created. So padding x2 means padding top and padding left, and the second value from the space range in the range mentioned in the tokens. And background is pink.dark, basically means that go to colors, find the pink value, and get the dark variant of it. So that way, it allows you to write lesser of CSS, but at the same time, it allows you to make better decisions. Reason being is when you're operating on a range automatically, because you're following a constraint-based design system, you will always have a natural fit for whatever choice you make. So for example, if one of the biggest challenges in Dgraph is that, front end, we do have a separate front end team, but at the same time, a lot of full stack engineers as well contribute. So now it's very unfair for somebody to go and say, hey, you know what, the spacing is a little slightly off over here. I think you should put the right value. Rather saying that, I think it's better to say, hey, you know what, just pick a value from the range, and all you need to do is bump it up or down, and see whether it fits naturally or not. So that way allows, it enforces, the token system enforces to have certain values, and it doesn't let the user to, obviously you can always override it, but uh, a natural value would always be ensure that it gets up. So you won't, let's say you are following something like 2 pixel, 4 pixel, 8 pixel, nobody's going to put a 5 pixel just for the sake of adding some space. So that allows to have that a clean implementation of all these token values. So StyleGun does the magic. It just basically takes the configuration which you supply, and just does the mapping, and gives you the CSS object which any CSS in JS solution would understand. So also, the token map is not just the values. It also defines component styles as well. So for example, again, if you're not able to read this, it's fine. All it says is that, there's a button object, it has a bunch of styles, and it also has some styles specific to a variant. So for example, here, there are button names like cheer, scream, whistle. So it defines what are the extra styles that particular specific variant has. So that way, if you want to create a new variant of a button, you don't need to write a code or something, rather just add one more variant and define what the styles are. So at what level you want to expose these styles, and since button is atomic, you know that only you're handling a single button HTML element. So you can be very straightforward and say, hey, you know what, whatever styles is, you just pass it to the button element. But you can also define, if it's a more of a composition, you can define what will be, for example, in a modal, you have a container, you have the overlay. So you can say overlay within the modal, what will be the style for an overlay. So that way you can have a number of levels and cascading based on how much you want to expose. So it's not like you want to expose everything, rather expose only those values which you think is required. So that way you can restrict the style access as well. So, and chromatic, right? We talked about chromatic. It basically tells you if there is any delta between whenever you raise a PR or something. So this really helped us to kind of make sure any kind of style changes is made, how much of impact it has in the overall app, and if we need to take any decision or make any change to address that. And naming, again, like as I said, right, it's very important to have namings which is, which is tailor-made, which is highly customized and personalized, so that the team also kind of understands where to use what. Like for example, a screen button, like in Dgraph, there are only two places where the screen button I think comes up, where you need to delete your backend or something. So that's where you basically say, hey, this is something which is a very strong action, and that's where you use the button. So nobody will use the screen button anywhere, right? They know that it's a screaming button, and they should justify that specific variant for that particular action, right? For example, jump cards. So we had these small pieces of cards on the dashboard, which takes you outside the app. So we named it as jump card, because it basically lets the user jump off from the app. So that way, and also what happens is, the marketing team also says, hey, can we remove this jump card? Can we add one more jump card? They understand what the value of that particular card is, and that based on that, we make sure the design also makes changes based on that. So naming is super important. So so with this, I think I have talked about the verticals. What are the patterns related to developer. I also want to like show you how we took this design principles, purpose, and patterns, and how we went from a specific screen to the end product. So we do have some documentation. I'm not going to go through line by line, but so something we started with this dashboard, right? This is when I joined it. This was something that this was the POC beta version, and obviously there were a lot of problems with the design, a lot of things with need, there was scope for a lot of improvement. So basically, when we looked at this and we applied all our principles, we said, hey, these are the four principles. Let's try to understand, what this problem is. So for example, I just want to start with like direction over choice. We thought that, hey, there are a lot of options here. Like it's a visual buffet and user need to make some selection. So we said, we need to give some sort of a direction, right? We cannot just show all options and say, choose one. So that way, I think based on each of the principle, we try to uh, define what the problem is, right? And then we said, we'll take the development, we'll take the action, right? Then we said, okay, let's make the changes and define the right, choose the right patterns and build the right components. So it's a lot of design and development going together hand in hand. It's not just one team effort; it's multiple, right? And that's how we came up with this dashboard. And then we said the reasons, right? We made our design choices. So we said, let's do a categorization of the event of the navigation links. Let's not just give a list of links, rather put some sort of category. Then we said, let's have divisions and say, hey, this division is for a specific intent. For example, selected backend, an exploration area, right? And something is social, we should have it in a different segment. So that way, I think we did like some sort of a component inventory, try to build those components, and and that's how we evolved typhoon-ui as well over a period of time. So it didn't happen at day one; rather, it was more of a discovery, right? And said that so we this is one of the design principle case study, and we have done multiple for different screens and different layouts. And honestly, this is something which is again a long time back. If you look at the actual dashboard now, it's totally different than what the intermediate solution was. So it's not necessarily a one-time effort, right? This evolves, keeps on evolving, and we make sure that the components within Figma and within the actual application and development, they are consistent and they're evolving on the basis on the same set of principles and the purpose which we are solving. So typhoon-ui is open source. It was really built for Dgraph, but you can always go ahead and look out for inspiration. I'm not here to say hey use this and this is the best component library. No, I'm not going to say that. This was built for Dgraph Cloud, and it works very well for the cloud system. What I would suggest is, take a look at Typhoon UI and see the concepts Typhoon UI implements, and especially the style gun, how it is implemented, and how it helps. So, for example, I'm short of time, but I'm just going to take another 1 or 2 minutes and just show you this small example. For example, this one is it is built out of Typhoon UI, this sandbox example. So here I'm not passing. So if you see, there is a theme context. So we are going to give a theme object, and Typhoon UI gives a theme out of box. So if I hover on this theme, you see it has some tokens, it has some components, and all these components have different styles. So it already comes with a package, which is obviously the Dgraph flavor. But you can also go ahead and extend the theme and define your own style. So for example, this one, um, if you see, all I need to do is I can just define a button inside the components and define a variant. If I'm using a cheer variant, I can just define what the color is. So in this case, let's say the background is my favorite color. So right, it is not part of the package, but all I did is like I just introduced new color called my favorite color, and assigned a hex code. So it becomes part of the system, and automatically the style gun does its magic and pulls the right values from the right place. So that way you can extend the theme and make it look your make it give it your own look and feel. And you might ask, why did you do it for Dgraph when you have built it for yourself? So the reason is within the product, we have different flavors. For example, an overlay interface, like for example, you have a tutorial, and usually it's of a different style, right? So if you have some modal which hovers and say, hey, click here, it is not the app interface. It's more of a wizard interface. So wizard interface had its own theme. So we defined its own different set of colors and how it affects the corresponding components. So that way, we defined our own mini theme for wizard components, and then applied it on typhoon-ui. So you can go ahead and I'm, in the interest of time, I'm kind of just summarizing it. So you can go ahead and define your own tokens and see how typhoon-ui responds to it. So, and also it's all TypeScript, so it ensures that you're fitting the right values, and all the shortcuts are also available, and it auto suggests any kind of shortcut if it is there. So that way, typhoon-ui makes the development much easier. So so before I close, I'll just summarize quickly the slide. That is a design system. So I think if somebody asks you what a design system is, I think this is what the ideal answer would be. Like, the design system is four things fundamentally, right? One is the purpose, what you're solving, whom you are solving for. Second is principles, how you intend to solve it. Patterns is the tangible components, and the shared language, right? What is the language? How do you talk in the system, right? That's very important. And these are the four parts of the design system. So if you really want to like further know what are the constructs and everything, I would suggest you to maybe I'll share the links with the larger audience, and probably you can go through it. If you don't want to like read books or a lot of articles, I've kind of summarized all these findings in different blog posts and in the Dgraph open community. So a really good book is Design Systems by Ala Kolmatova. She's done a wonderful job of compiling a lot of findings, and majority of my findings are from that book. So, and in one line, what's a design system? She has defined it very beautifully. She says a design system is a set of interconnected patterns and shared practices coherently organized to serve the purpose of a digital product. I think that clearly summarizes what the design system is. And as a developer, and especially in the React ecosystem, I think typhoon-ui is a manifestation of these ideas altogether. So with that, I think I'll end this talk. Any questions, feel free to drop a message. I'll be around for a while, and I'll try to answer those questions as much as possible.